Imagine someone is just throwing pebbles at your window, right? Like every single night.
Oh, that sounds miserable.
Yeah, exactly. And, they never actually break the glass, but you can't sleep. Your home security system is just constantly going off, and you're utterly exhausted.
Right.
So you look to your roommate for help,
Yeah.
the one who, owns the heavy-duty alarm system, and they just calmly announce they're packing up and moving out.
Wow. Yeah, that's a perfect way to frame it.
Right. Well, welcome to the deep dive. Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, May 19th, 2026. And the title of today's deep dive is Europe's Security Shift, Drone Threats, NATO Divisions, and Russian Pressure.
It's a really profound moment to be analyzing the geopolitical landscape with you today. We've got a highly complex, very rapidly evolving situation to unpack here.
We absolutely do. But before we get into the details, we want to let you know that this deep dive is sponsored by ProWave AI, and it's generated by Stylo News. That's an AI-powered news application.
Right, and what makes that particularly relevant for today's topic is that Stylo News is actually the consumer version of Stylo Intel Ops.
Yeah, which is huge.
It is. It's an enterprise software platform that's currently being used by, government, military, and global business operations to track live events.
So essentially, the intelligence estimates, the diplomatic cables, the situational reports we're using to guide our analysis right now, they're pulled directly from that ecosystem.
Exactly. You, the listener, are getting unique access to the very same tools and data streams that global decision makers use to form their strategies.
It's basically like having a seat at the highest level briefing table. And that brings us to our mission for today. Over the last 2 weeks or so, a very distinct, honestly somewhat alarming pattern of events has emerged across Europe.
Yeah, and if you just read the headlines individually, the situation feels incredibly chaotic.
Completely chaotic.
Yeah.
So our goal today is to sort of channel the ethos of classic, 1960s era news anchors. We're going to calmly and neutrally examine the facts, completely without the panic.
Right. No fear-mongering. We'll look at the physical realities on the ground, analyze the proposed courses of action from key leaders, and gauge the public sentiment that's bubbling up on social media. Just a clear, objective picture of a continent in transition.
Spot on. So to understand that transition, I think we have to start by looking at the immediate physical threats, outlining Europe's borders right now.
Definitely. And the word defining this exact moment is asymmetric.
Asymmetrics, right?
Yeah, because we aren't seeing a classic Cold War style buildup. We aren't looking at massive conventional tank columns massing on a border just waiting for a starting gun.
Right. It's not that at all.
No, the primary threat vector, which has been heavily utilized by Russia in recent weeks, involves mass drone employment, mixed missile drone salvos, and these highly targeted cyber operations.
And the sheer scale of these operations, it's what really stands out when you look at the raw data. I mean, we're talking about salvos of 700 to 1,600 drones and missiles launched against Ukraine in a single 24-hour period.
That volume is just staggering.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, these are not just confined to the eastern front lines anymore. These strikes are happening incredibly close to NATO borders in the West.
Yeah, the spillover effects are no longer theoretical. They are highly visible at the local and national levels across Europe right now.
For instance, Poland. Poland recently had to scramble its air defense aircraft, right?
Yes, and they significantly raised their military readiness levels. And scrambling fighter jets it's not a trivial action.
Not at all.
It costs millions of dollars in fuel, maintenance, operational strain just to monitor the strike activity happening literally right next door.
In this tension, it's stretching all the way up to the Nordic regions, too. Like, there was a very serious drone incident near Helsinki, Finland, just days ago.
Right. That Helsinki incident is a perfect example of civilian vulnerability.
What exactly happened there?
Well, an unidentified drone presence completely disrupted civil aviation. Commercial flights had to be diverted, airports were effectively shut down, and military fighter jets were scrambled to protect a frontline capital region.
Wow. Just from an unidentified drone.
Exactly. And if you pair that with the intelligence coming out of Sweden, their defense minister just issued a formal warning to Denmark about a potential symbolic Russian seizure of a Baltic island.
Specifically Gotland, right?
Yes, Scotland. It's the strategic linchpin for controlling the Baltic Sea. Even just signaling a vague threat toward an island like that forces Sweden, Denmark, and the entire Nordic defense apparatus to stay on extremely high alert.
Which drains resources
Yeah.
and obviously spikes public anxiety. It makes me think of an analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Usually, when we think of a military threat, we picture a bear attack. A bear is massive, it's obvious,
Right.
and it's a clear existential threat that triggers an immediate maximum response.
Right.
In NATO terms, a bear crossing the border triggers Article 5 and all-out allied defense.
But this asymmetric strategy, well, not a bear, it feels much more like a swarm of bees.
That captures the operational reality perfectly,
Just
honestly.
because a single bee sting is not an existential threat. You're not going to, pull out a cannon to shoot a bee. No, of course not.
But 1,000 bee stings, relentless, low-cost stings, constantly testing your windows, getting into the house, disrupting your daily life, it creates a massive crisis without ever looking like a traditional textbook invasion.
And it goes deeper than that because the
Mhm.
swarm of bees strategy relies heavily on a critical intelligence concept called the attribution gap.
The attribution gap. Walk us through how that actually works in this context.
Essentially, an attribution gap is the window of time and uncertainty between when an event happens and when you can definitively publicly prove who orchestrated it.
Okay.
So when a GPS signal drops out over the Baltic Sea, blinding commercial ships, or when an unidentified off-the-shelf drone shuts down an airport in Helsinki, you cannot immediately go to a podium and say with absolute certainty that the Russian government launched this specific attack from this specific base at this specific time.
Right, because consumer drones can be launched by anyone, and cyber attacks are, routinely masked through proxy servers. It just creates this fog of ambiguity.
Exactly. That ambiguity is the weapon. It allows for immediate blame shifting and plausible deniability. And here's the genius of the strategy. While European governments are spending days or weeks trying to verify the forensic facts, the operational objective has already been achieved.
The disruption already happened.
Right. The airspace was disrupted, military readiness was stressed. The public's confidence in their government's ability to protect them is chipped away. It allows a state actor to apply intense pressure without ever technically crossing the legal threshold into open war.
So if an alliance is facing a relentless swarm of bees, basic logic dictates they should lock shields and unite. Right? A shared threat usually forges unity.
Usually, yes.
But the data over the past 2 weeks reveals deep, widening international fractures within NATO itself. The transatlantic relationship is under profound strain.
It really is. And the primary catalyst driving this strain is the recent announcement by U.S. President Donald Trump to withdraw approximately 5,000 U.S. troops from Germany.
And the stated plan is to relocate some of those forces to Poland, while also explicitly threatening to reduce forces in places like Italy and Spain.
Right. And to analyze this neutrally, we have to break down the differing perspectives here.
Let's do it.
On the U.S. side, this stems from long-standing, very vocal frustrations over European burden sharing. The argument from Washington is that many European nations have chronically failed to meet their financial obligations to NATO.
Effectively leaving American taxpayers to foot the bill for European security.
Exactly. But the immediate trigger for this specific withdrawal seems to be a severe diplomatic rupture regarding the Middle East.
Specifically, the conflict involving Iran, right?
Yeah.
European nations, most notably the core powers of Germany and France, refused to support recent U.S. and Israeli military actions against Iran.
Yes. That refusal deeply fractured the geopolitical alignment. From the perspective of the U.S. administration, they are taking unilateral steps to shift their military posture, punishing countries they view as uncooperative and rewarding those, like Poland, that they see as stepping up financially and strategically.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the tactical reality of this. If the U.S. is withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany, but moving a chunk of them to Poland, which is physically closer to the Russian border, right up against the Suwalki corridor, isn't that just moving your defensive pieces forward on the chessboard?
That's a common question.
Right. Like, why is Europe viewing this as a massive crisis and a withdrawal rather than just a tactical reinforcement of the eastern flank?
That is the piece people often miss because it comes down to invisible infrastructure. From the U.S. perspective, yes, moving troops to Poland reinforces the physical front line, but from the European perspective, Germany is not just a place where American soldiers sleep in barracks.
It's much more than that.
Way more. Since the end of World War II, Germany has been the central nervous system for U.S. power projection across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Think about Ramstein Air Base.
It's the anchor. It's where everything flows through.
It is the motherboard of the entire operation. Ramstein handles massive logistical supply chains, crucial medical evacuations from conflict zones, and high-level command and control operations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you cannot just pick up a decades-old intelligence and logistics hub and drop it into Warsaw overnight. Pulling 5,000 troops out of that anchor is a massive institutional downgrade.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, this move is accompanied by rhetoric threatening to leave NATO entirely if financial demands aren't met. So for European capitals in Berlin and Paris, this does not feel like a strategic forward deployment. It feels like highly unpredictable U.S. commitment. It signals that the American security umbrella they have relied on for 80 years might be closing.
So if the U.S. umbrella is suddenly looking like it might close, Europe is essentially left standing in the rain. They have no choice but to build their own umbrella.
Precisely.
And that realization is triggering a massive financial and strategic scramble. The narrative has aggressively shifted toward Europe, attempting to build a fully independent security architecture, a European NATO.
We are witnessing a historic push for strategic autonomy. Figures like French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz are heavily advocating for this. The European Commission has mobilized a plan known as the Rearm Europe Initiative, or Readiness 2030.
And the financial scale of this is staggering. They are aiming to mobilize 800 billion euros for defense spending by 2030.
800 billion, it's historic.
Yeah, and when you look at the financial sentiment data, there is a massive rotation happening in the markets right now. Venture capital is flowing out of traditional consumer tech and flooding into European defense technology startups.
The focus of this capital isn't on building traditional battleships or heavy tanks either. It is heavily concentrated on AI-driven military tech, autonomous systems, and kamikaze drones.
Like the startup Helsing, right?
Yes, companies like Helsing in Germany are achieving massive valuation growth. The underlying logic here is that modern warfare is shifting from heavy, expensive, slow-to-build hardware to cheap, software-driven, disposable technology.
So if you can use AI to guide a $2,000 drone to disable a multi-million-dollar tank, the power dynamic shifts toward nimble software startups.
Exactly, which Europe hopes to cultivate to bypass American supply chains.
But I have to push back on this based on the timeline.
Go ahead.
The intelligence analysts estimate that building a fully autonomous European defense alliance, one that actually functions cohesively, will take 15 to 20 years. Can Europe actually afford to wait 2 decades to build this new umbrella when there are swarms of drones disrupting their airspace today?
That's the billion-euro question.
Right. Is this European NATO a realistic immediate solution or just a long-term political aspiration?
The reality on the ground today validates your skepticism. Despite the venture capital boom and the ambitious political rhetoric, Europe still relies on the United States for 75% of its arms purchases.
75%. You can't just spin up factories to replace that overnight.
You cannot. And the problem isn't just manufacturing capacity, it's fragmentation. Europe doesn't have a single unified army. They have 27 different national militaries with different languages, different command structures, and different equipment.
Wow, 27. That's a logistical nightmare.
It really is.
Yeah.
While the U.S. uses one primary main battle tank, European nations operate dozens of different variations. Standardizing that supply chain alone is daunting. And beyond just buying weapons, Europe relies on the U.S. for critical strategic assets.
Things like high-end satellite surveillance, heavy airlift capabilities.
And most importantly, the ultimate security guarantee, the nuclear deterrent. Integrating those fragmented industries into a single cohesive force that doesn't rely on the U.S. backbone is an immense multi-decade challenge.
Okay, so the broad consensus in Brussels is we need to rearm and integrate. But as we look deeper into the national updates, it becomes incredibly clear that not every nation, not every leader, and certainly not every institution agrees on this path.
No, the internal divisions are profound.
Yeah. The idea of a unified European response is already fracturing under political pressure. Take Lithuania as a prime example. As a frontline Baltic state, they are acutely aware of the daily threat. They are currently spending an astonishing 5.4% of their GDP on defense.
Which vastly exceeds NATO targets.
All right, and their foreign minister, Kęstutis Budrys, did not hold back in recent statements. He heavily criticized Southern European nations for lacking commitment to defense.
He essentially pointed the finger and said, we are doing the heavy lifting, we are preparing for the worst, and you are not taking this seriously.
Exactly. You have the frontline states demanding total immediate commitment. But contrast that with the political reality in Romania. Just weeks ago, Romania experienced a political crisis that resulted in the fall of a pro-European government.
Right.
The current president, Nicolae Dan, is shifting the country toward a highly Eurosceptic sovereignist stance, criticizing EU policies and pulling away from the central Brussels consensus.
So the political will is wavering depending on which border you live near.
Yep. And because of that wavering, entirely new, unexpected alliances are forming outside the traditional Western European core. This is the part that genuinely shocked me. Turkey is rapidly rising as a massive defense hub for European nations.
It is a critical, highly pragmatic development. Turkey recently hosted the Saha Defense Fair, and Belgium's defense minister traveled there to sign 9 separate defense agreements.
Kind agreements.
Yes, effectively integrating Ankara into broader European defense frameworks.
Belgium, the literal geographic and political heart of the European Union, is signing defense pacts with Turkey. That shows just how desperate Europe is getting for immediate industrial capacity.
If they can't get it from the U.S., and they can't build it internally fast enough, they are looking outward. It demonstrates that nations are prioritizing reliable military-industrial partnerships and raw production capability over traditional political boundaries.
Now, to maintain total neutrality and look at the entire board, we also have to examine the counter-narratives. Not everyone supports this €800 billion rearmament plan, and there are powerful voices pushing back against it.
Absolutely. First, we have to look at the deterrence messaging coming from Russia. Russian military experts are aggressively and publicly highlighting the destructive capabilities of their advanced missile systems.
Specifically, the RS-28 Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile and the hypersonic Oreshnik system.
Yes, the Oreshnik is particularly concerning from a defense perspective because of the physics involved.
It doesn't fly in a normal arc, right?
Exactly. Hypersonic missiles like the Oreshnik don't fly in a predictable arch trajectory like traditional ballistic missiles. They maneuver within the atmosphere at speeds exceeding Mach 5.
Wow.
Because their flight path is unpredictable and incredibly fast, traditional air defense systems just cannot mathematically calculate an intercept point.
So the strategic messaging from Russia is stark. They're reminding Europe that no matter how many conventional kamikaze drones or tanks you build over the next 20 years, Russia retains the technological ability to completely bypass those defenses and neutralize NATO infrastructure.
It is a clear signal designed to make Europe question the value of massive rearmament. But that pushback isn't just coming from military adversaries.
Right.
There is also a profound moral counter-narrative emerging from within Europe itself. Pope Leo XIV made a highly publicized address condemning the recent 14% surge in European military spending.
He described it as a betrayal of diplomacy.
He did. The Pope's argument centers on the human cost. He stated that pouring hundreds of billions of euros into defense contractors diverts essential funds away from social investments, healthcare, education, infrastructure.
Right. He argued that this arms race enriches an indifferent elite while ultimately fueling global tensions rather than resolving them.
Exactly. He is advocating for a halt to the militarization and a return to peace talks. This actually echoes some defense experts who suggest that Europe needs to engage Russia in dialogue to establish a new, inclusive security architecture, rather than just building a larger fortress.
So, synthesizing all these wildly different perspectives, from venture capitalists building AI drones to the Pope advocating for peace, where does the general public stand? What is the social media sentiment actually telling us?
We analyze the sentiment across platforms like X, and the data paints a picture of a continent deeply anxious and fundamentally torn. On one hand, users are expressing high anxiety over the unpredictability of the United States.
But that anxiety is compounded by domestic worries, right? Users are highly vocal about weak local economies, inflation, mass migration.
Precisely. They are feeling the economic strain of everyday life and then being told their governments need to spend 800 billion euros on weapons.
That's a tough sell.
It is. Yet, interestingly, amid that economic anxiety, there is still heavy vocal support for the acceleration of European defense integration. Users are enthusiastic about the military tech boom. They want sovereignty and independence from the U.S. At the same time, we are tracking a noticeable right-wing populist shift in political sentiment, as voters react against establishment parties they feel have failed to protect them either economically or physically.
Impartially speaking, the public discourse is torn between two broad competing courses of action, committing fully to massive rearmament and technological independence regardless of the cost, versus seeking renewed diplomatic engagement to de-escalate the continent entirely.
It is a profound crossroads, and the path Europe chooses will define the next century.
It really will. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's briefly summarize the primary patterns we've tracked.
Sounds good.
First, the physical reality-elevated asymmetric hybrid threats. The drone swarms and cyber probes testing the borders without triggering open war. Second, the international reality's serious transatlantic friction, highlighted by the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the logistical hub of Germany.
Right.
And third, the internal reality, Europe's complex, highly fragmented scramble for military autonomy, marked by deep divisions over spending and strategy.
As for what you should be watching for next in the immediate future, keep your eyes heavily focused on the pivotal NATO summit taking place in Ankara in July 2026.
That's going to be a big one.
Definitely. The decisions made there regarding alliance reforms, the integration of Turkey, and defense spending will be critical indicators of Europe's direction. Additionally, expect ongoing low-level drone probing and hybrid incidents to continue near the Nordic and Baltic borders as the attribution gap is continually tested.
We will be tracking all of that closely. Now, before we sign off, a quick reminder about our sponsor. This entire deep dive was powered by Stylo News.
Yes, and if you want to cut through the chaotic headlines and get the exact same caliber of objective, intelligence-style briefing we just utilized, you can.
Stylo News is a mobile and computer app that you can download to customize your own personal briefs. It pulls from hundreds of traditional news sources in X, synthesizing the data instantly so you can understand the mechanisms behind the news.
It is a remarkable, highly efficient tool for anyone who needs to stay objectively informed in a complex world. You can subscribe for on-demand, AI-powered news at www.stylonews.com.
All right, changing gears here to close out, thank you so much for spending part of your morning with us. We genuinely love digging into these complex topics with you.
We really do.
If there is a geopolitical event, a sudden industry shift, or a trend you want us to unpack in the future, please let us know. You can request topics for future deep dives, and definitely make sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms.
We greatly appreciate you taking the time to listen and analyze with us.
To leave you today, I want you to think back to that 15 to 20-year timeline for building a European NATO. If Europe actually pulls this off, if they navigate the internal political divisions, standardize their fragmented armies, survive the asymmetric swarm of bees, and manage to achieve full military autonomy by, say, 2045, what happens then?
It's a fascinating question.
Will a fully armed, technologically independent Europe simply act as an equal, compliant partner to the United States, or will it become a completely independent geopolitical pole with its own distinct adversaries, its own foreign policy, and its own global agenda? Something to think about. Until next time.